Hi, and welcome to another narration, presented by yours truly, Cryptids Roost. Be sure to check out the blooper reel at the end of the video, which is then followed by the end screen, where you will find more videos listed. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not. I'm a SWAT officer who was sent to investigate a rural Alaskan town. Part 1. This awesome series is written by Officer Gallows. Perseverance could be considered as a true virtue that everyone should have, considering the fact that we as humans deal with a plethora of problems on a normal basis, from average inconveniences to downright panic-inducing situations. The general outcome of all of these situations is adapting to them and overcoming them in some way. Whether that be physically or mentally doesn't matter, as long as a problem has been solved. Because if the problem isn't solved, it could result in death or deterioration of the psyche, both of which are highly undesirable for obvious reasons. But what if this situation has dozens of problems that seem to be progressively worse as you solve one? What if you solve one problem to only cause a far greater one that requires even more energy and has the potential to cause greater suffering and trauma? How can you handle a situation that you once thought hope shone through, only to be faced with utter darkness, and all you can do is try and hide? Well, this is where perseverance comes through. All living beings have the inherent will to live and will protect that desire at all cost, casting fear, doubt and hesitation away to see the next day. The saying that a cornered animal is deadly would be an understatement that could cause the arrogant to fall. I always thought that the idea of instinct and survival were fascinating and could be considered part of my job that kept me alive, with me being a police officer who could encounter a situation that was less than ideal to handle. Now granted, I've only been one for about a year now. However, that doesn't mean I haven't seen a fair share of violent acts that have been committed on people who didn't deserve it. I went into this profession knowing that I would see inhuman acts committed on people who truly did not deserve the cruelty that was brought upon them, which still didn't stop my anger when I saw a victim. My blood would boil, and I could feel my skin get hotter and my jaw clenched in frustration that I couldn't do a damn thing to help them, that they died in fear and were alone in their final moments always gave me that feeling. A feeling that showed how cruel and unfair the world truly was. My goal was to try and shine a little glimpse of light in an otherwise unforgiving world, and try to help where I could. Now, even though I think the world is cruel, doesn't stop me from having an optimistic view of it to some degree. I still firmly believe that there still lies an unseen hope. People can show great compassion and humanity even in darkness. A prime example would be the attack on September 11th, where people came together and helped one another instead of only thinking of themselves. This also shows why perseverance is important to humanity's continued survival and how resilient we truly are. A dip in the road brought me back to my surroundings after I had zoned out contemplating humanity's perseverance. I was looking into what seemed to be an ancient forest that had trees towering above the pickup I was in. The man driving took a glance at me, then looked forward as we continued to move in silence. The man, who looked to be in his 60s from his salt and pepper hair, had a perpetually stern look to him, as if he didn't trust his surroundings in the least. His eyes seemed to lack light in a way, almost as if he's seen where the end of the road leads, which would make sense due to our profession. We had a brief conversation when I first arrived in Alaska, where he introduced himself as the police chief of the station I was being sent to. I dreaded the news when I heard that I was being assigned to a small Alaskan town, which was due to the fact that supposedly the town was mysteriously devoid of any crime or financial trouble. And I guess that caused some eyebrows to raise at the top of the chain. However, they couldn't send in anyone, as that would be too suspicious. So they sent me. I was the most logical choice since I was fairly new, and I managed to get into SWAT, even though I had not been in the force for longer than a year and a half. I also passed the academy with flying colours. I did find the secrecy to be a bit tasteless, as I preferred to be honest, but I had no qualms with what seemed to be a simple recon mission. I also should mention that I had a bachelor's degree in law enforcement, so I'm sure that put into why I was chosen as well. After our initial conversation, the chief didn't utter a single word to me, and I didn't feel like breaking the silence either, so we continued in silence. That was until the town came into view. He stopped the car on the side of the road, then looked at me and said,
"Listen, boy, you don't want to get involved with this town. So just tell me the name of the officer who told your agency about the events happening, so I can drive you back to the airport."
I looked at him with a face of confusion plastered onto my face. Well, mock confusion, as I had already thought that he knew about my reason for being here, so I had to be prepared for a question like that. He didn't know, but I never misanalyze what a person is capable of, and I knew as soon as I laid my eyes on him that he was far smarter than my police commissioner gave him credit for. Now, I don't know why he used the word agency, or why he assumed someone ratted him out. He could have said administration, not agency, but I didn't have the time to think about that, as I had to continue my confusion act. "What are you talking about? I'm here for training in harsh environments," I said with a confused tone. Now, I prefer to say half-truths instead of outright lying, as half-truths are far harder to detect deception, as you are, in a way, telling the truth, but not the whole truth. He eyed me for a moment, then turned the key, and we headed down the road to what would be my home for the foreseeable future. The town was as small and quaint as any small Alaskan town would be. I guessed about a few hundred lived in the town, from the view we were at, and it was covered in snow. One thing I hated was snow, especially for someone who was used to the hot climate like Texas, which is where I grew up in. So this would be a very interesting stay. My one saving grace is that the uniform is long-sleeved, and I'll be wearing Kevlar, which adds another layer of warmth. We finally reached the first house of the town. which should have been relieving after such a long drive. But a cold chill shot through my body as we crossed that house. It felt like hearing the sound when you're home alone. My throat went dry and my hair stood up as I surveyed the surrounding town, looking for the cause of this feeling. And that's when it hit me. The entire town was surrounded by a dense forest that seemed never ending. This town felt truly separated from the rest of the world, as if it was in its own little world, and it made me bitterly aware that I was an outsider. Almost like I was treading on ground that wasn't meant for me. This dark reality sent another shiver down my spine as I realised I was stuck in this very town. And with that thought, I could have sworn the trees closed in even more, like a noose around my neck. As I started to think of how big of a mistake I had made taking this task on, we arrived at the police station, which in a way relieved me. The station was small and looked to be ancient compared to other stations I had seen, with its sun-bleached walls that showed years of weather erosion. The sign was in an even worse state, with it missing almost all of its letters. Calling it a dump would be an understatement, seeing as it could hardly pass as a place that could be called safe. The chief didn't wait for me to get out of my stupor as he walked straight to the front doors and entered the building. I began to walk when again the forest caught my eye. The sea of trees had a calling to them. It was almost as if I was entranced by the forest, or more accurately, I suppose would be entranced by what was in that ancient foliage. The doors to the station let out a squeak as I stepped into the main lobby of the station. I was quite impressed by the size of the station, as it seemed to stretch on. Halls that seemed to look never-ending. The station had a sterile feel about it, similar to a doctor's office, as nothing was hung on the walls, and the centre desk didn't have anything but a prehistoric computer sitting atop it. I saw the chief enter the back section of the station, so I fast-walked to his side as he began to talk.
We don't have any available houses for you to rent, so you'll just have to stay at our motel while you work down here. You can find some better fitting clothes at the convenience store down the road next to the motel. That's also the place you will get your food since we don't have a supermarket.
I expected both of these situations to be the case, as the town was barely even considered a town due to its size. It would still be a tad inconvenient, but that couldn't be helped. He then suddenly stopped, which caught me off guard, and said,
There are also some rules I'm going to tell you, and I won't repeat myself, so listen up. First, do not under any circumstance enter that forest. I don't care if you see the Yeti roasting marshmallows.
I wanted to interject, but he simply put up his hand and continued.
Second, you're the only SWAT officer here, so I won't need you. Your only job is to come into work, sit down at a desk, and fill out some paperwork. I don't care if you wear your gear or not, as the other officers come into work during nights, so you also won't encounter them.
I was stunned at this too. I was getting paid to do paperwork and to sit there acting like I'm doing my job. Again, I was going to interject, but he put up his hand once again and said,
Finally, you'll get a standard squad car, which is what you will use to go out and about with. Now that I have that out of the way, you are dismissed.
I attempted to ask questions, but he just kept walking, so I decided to just give up on that and head outside. As I start to walk away, he yells.
Your key is under the front desk.
I rummage through the front desk and find the metallic key under some papers. I exit through the front doors as I remember seeing the lot with squad cars to the right of the station, and press a key fob and hear the beep of the first squad car on the lot. I unlock the door and hop into the driver's seat and start the engine. Well, I attempt to start it, as it didn't want to for the first few times, until it roared to life. I found myself letting out a sigh as I think about what I have just gotten myself into. My first stop is at a convenience store to get some food, and maybe find a cheap heavy jacket or something to keep myself warm, or at least keep myself from getting frostbite. I find the convenience store, which seems to be in a similar state as the police station. I enter the store and find a lady who looks to be in her late 60s with frizzled grey hair and a face that's hardened with age manning the register. I walk to the food section and find an assortment of food that could be potential candidates for my dinner. However, I just settle with a bag of chips and ingredients for a sandwich. With the food in hand, I go to find a small pack of water bottles that I also grab along the way. Now all that's left is to find a suitable jacket that can hopefully keep the throngs of cold out and keep me fairly warm. I sadly have no luck, as there isn't a single jacket within the store, so I let out a sigh of defeat and walk up to the register to pay for my items. As I put the items on the counter, the old woman starts talking to me.
You better not trust anyone in this town. They will kill you if you go into places you don't belong, boy.
Her voice was haggard and sounded like a lifelong smoker, but that wasn't what truly caught my interest. It was a statement that had me captivated. Sorry, Mom, but I must have misheard what you said.
No, you didn't, boy. These people are vultures who will tear you apart if you allow them, especially if you dare break that one rule,
she said with a tinge of hatred. Do you mean the rule about the forest? I replied back.
Yes, boy, you enter that forest, you're a dead man if you come back.
She let out a laugh, then proceeded to say,
If you make it out of that forest alive.
Are you saying that going into a forest would make them mad enough to kill me? That would be an insane thing to do. The old lady chuckled and said,
You seem like a good kid, so listen to my advice. But I know all too well the call of a hunt, and you, boy, you're a hunter, even if you don't realize it.
With that, she bagged all my items, but before I could leave, she said,
Oh, and here is an old parka that used to be my son's. Don't worry about buying it, you can have it.
I thanked her for the gift and walked out of the building, only to be met with the frigid cold air, which resulted in me wrapping my arms around my chest as a futile way of trying to keep my body's warmth. I set the bags of assorted goods on the ground and put on the newly acquired parka. I thought it was weird that she gave me her son's parka, but I just assumed that her son moved away, so I didn't feel as bad for keeping it. I could instantly feel the warmth creep back into my shivering body as I hopped into the car and took the short drive to the motel, where I parked in front of the lobby. I stepped back into the frigid air and briskly walked into the main lobby. Well, I guess a small dingy room better befitted it than confusing it with a clean and normal-sized area. A stout woman at the counter glanced up from her fashion magazine to eye me for a good 5 seconds before saying,
Your room is number 7. The key's on the counter. Also, the price of the room is $500 a week.
I sighed as I set my card down and snatched the key from the counter. The woman took the card and slid it into a grungy card reader and set it back down on the counter. With both my card and key in hand, I exit the building, jump into the car and look for the room number, get out and unlock the room's door. I don't know why I was expecting a room that didn't look like it hadn't been cleaned since the 60s. But I was really starting to hate this place. And I mean, really hate this place. I was no stranger to motels and hotels due to me and my family being nomadic for a period of a year. But this room was just downright nasty. It had everything you might imagine with its unknown stains, rotted carpet, mouldy walls, and a ceiling that was leaking an unknown substance. Yeah, this room that I'm stuck in puts a dumpster to shame. But at least it was warm, and the beds looked clean, so I guess it wasn't all bad, just mostly bad. I set my backpack down and began to empty the contents of it on a discoloured nightstand. Now, I brought long sleeve shirt, jeans and my issued SWAT uniform. I only realised now that packing a jacket would have been a smarter idea. But I assumed there would be jackets galore in a frozen town. But the world is full of surprises, I guess. The backpack was more of a duffel bag, so I had room to fit all of that in there. I decided to put the clothes on the second bed to avoid getting them in a state where they would need to be burned. I sat on the bed and began to think about how I was going to snoop without raising any suspicion or unwarranted trouble. And during this period of thought, I noticed something from the small crack between where the curtains of the room met. A woman is standing on the edge of the forest, looking inward, as if she sees something in that void of darkness. I get a sudden urge to stop her from entering that forest, but I remember what that old crone said to me back at the convenience store, and how going in that forest would mark my end. I let out a heavy sigh as I pulled the parka over my torso and reached to grab my gun from the duffel bag, only to realise that I was forced to leave it behind because of the policy of not having guns on a plane. This caused an irritated grunt as I have to go unarmed into a forest which could house bears or wolves. There was no time for belly aching as I opened the door slowly to make sure there wasn't a soul around, and quickly, under the guise of night, darted to the forest's edge. I made it about halfway when I noticed that the woman seemed to have quite a big bump in her stomach region. This made me continue to think about how bizarre of a situation this was, as she must have been pregnant and far into her third trimester. As I neared the woman, she stepped into the forest in a swift motion. I came to a halt once I reached the spot where her feet left indentations in the snow. I looked ahead to see a forest that was covered in a deep blanket of snow and gave the canopy of trees a strange glow that made the forest look almost supernatural. Despite the biting chill, I pressed on after the woman, now more out of curiosity than anything else. The wind bore down on me from what felt like all directions as my legs slowly sank deeper into the sea of snow. I heard a low rumble coming from a patch of snow to my right, which caused me to whip my head to my right side to check what the rumble was. I was met with a patch of bright green grass. This scene caused my brain to sputter as I wondered why and how grass was growing. I then turned my head around and was met with a similar scene in all directions. The biting chill of the cold had vanished altogether, and I was standing in a lush forest. I tried to swallow, but the spit got caught in my throat. My entire being was on high alert. The current situation I found myself in was just wrong. I've been in my fair share of uncomfortable situations, but this took the top spot. A forest that once was buried deep within snow seemed to instantly flourish and grow and erase any trace of winter. I could even smell the newly bloomed roses of a nearby rose bush. My heart was racing and my head began to ache from the amount of stress that was building within my body. That's when I saw from the corner of my eye a black object slinking along bushes to the right of me. I whipped to face my right and saw the rustle of the bushes and an unearthly growl that sent a biting fear throughout my body. I was trained to break out the lizard brain during training, but my body wouldn't move. It's as if that growl wasn't just threatening me with death, it was threatening me with a fate worse than death. As I stared at the bushes, I managed to start moving my hand. That was a good start. So I used my hand to pinch my cheek as a way to stimulate my body into action. It worked. I could feel my feet come under my control again. And as soon as I had control over my body once again, I slowly began to backpedal away from the source of the noise. I made it about 7 steps before a pitch black paw exited the bush. As I looked at the paw, or what I assumed to be a paw, my head started to ache, and the longer I looked, the more out of place the appendage looked. The dark shape seemed to transform the more I stared, so I yanked my head away from the object and looked to my left side. That lasted a good 5 seconds before another paw-like object came forth. This hastened my backpedaling as I was no longer concerned with tripping or hitting a tree. Then what seemed to be a head popped out of the bush. The vaguely head-like object was something that would belong in my nightmares. It had long, jagged teeth. Its canine teeth were jutting out of its mouth, showing the blood-red tinge it had on them. Its eyes were pits of crimson red that had bloodlust seeping out of them as it stared directly into my eyes. The dog-like creature had a long snout that pointed into a razor-like edge, along with its huge ears that were in a position that seemed like it was preparing to pounce. My body screamed to run. Every fibre of my being knew that if I didn't run, I would meet a grisly end, and I agreed. This monstrosity that stood in front of me was going to rip me apart piece by piece, so I whipped myself around and ran. I knew turning my back to it was a terrible idea, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get the hell away from that monster. This was a mistake as I felt a sharp pain in my back and was sent flying for a couple of yards, only to be then slammed chest first into a tree. I slid down the tree trunk and coughed up blood. I was sure that all of my ribs on my right side were crushed and about half of my left ones were broken. I was having trouble breathing, and when I did breathe, pain shot through my body, indicating a bone tore through one of my lungs. I started to feel warm liquid seep down my leg, meaning that the creature tore my back to what I assumed to be shreds. The grass under me changed to a deep red as a pool of blood began to gather on the patch of grass. I attempted to lift myself from the spot where I laid. However, my shoulder screamed in pain when I tried. I could also include a broken shoulder blade on top of my injuries. So, for a few seconds, I just lay there, groaning until I felt the beast bite into my leg and toss me into the air, causing blood to gush out of my numerous wounds. The creature brought his paw up and slashed my face with it, which again sent me hurtling through the air. This time I landed on a rock, back first, with a resounding thud that followed. I blacked out when I hit the rock for a few seconds, and when I came to, I could see the monster approach me. I could also see the devilish grin it had on its face as it approached. It was enjoying this. So the main goal was to make me suffer as much pain as I could. This caused something to snap in my head. I began to laugh uncontrollably. I couldn't believe this was happening. This shouldn't be happening, and definitely not to me. I couldn't believe my luck. First, I get to a cold wasteland akin to some sort of hell, but then I get attacked by some creature. This situation felt surreal as I stared at the beast. All the pain I once felt drained away, and I could finally stand once again. And I reached for a medium-sized rock that lay near me. At that moment, I wasn't going down without a fight, no matter how futile it would be. I was determined to not die without one. I gritted my teeth and walked as best I could to the monstrosity. Its smile grew to an immeasurable size, and it pounced towards me. Its movements were a flash, but I managed to land a solid and hard strike as it neared me. This caused the head of it to swing to the left, and some form of liquid trickled out of the wound on its left side of its face. It backed up a few steps before pouncing again. This time it was too fast and I could see it was going for my throat. So in that instant I decided to guard with my left arm. The creature bit deep into my arm and began to savagely shape my arm like a dog who was attacking someone might do. The pain fueled my rage as I began to repeatedly smash the rock onto the monster's face over and over again. My right wrist ached and my hand was going numb. I could feel the blood loss start affecting me, as my eyes seemed to grow foggy and my hand was losing power. The monster finally ripped my left arm off and once again pounced. I pushed the rock into its mouth, but it just bit through the rock, taking my pinky, ring finger and half of my finger along with it. It pushed past my arm and sunk its teeth deep into my throat. Blood exploded from my mouth as I made a futile attempt to push it off, only to find it bite harder. The pain returned and my body could no longer handle the blood loss, so I wasn't surprised to find myself falling back onto that rock. The monster began to savagely rip my jugular out, and as it did that, it raised its paw once again, and it brought it down on my face once more. This time, it ripped through my right eye with its middle claw, then it slowly ate my jugular in front of me, as some sort of bragging. People always said that your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. But for me, all I saw was the creature slowly finish off my jugular and proceed to eat my left arm. At that moment, all I felt was resignation. I tried my best and did what I could, and in the end, I still lost. As I was thinking, I looked past the creature with my remaining eye and saw something peculiar. Two people were approaching the creature. One of the two was a scrawny man who had messy black hair and glasses that were too big for his face, but that also concealed his eyes. He was fiddling with the red tie that matched his red suit. The other was a woman that seemed to be around my age, with blonde hair that bordered on white and was slightly in disarray. I could see that her eyes were a scarlet red. She wore white camouflage, akin to a hunter's. I also noticed the weapons that they were carrying. The man was holding a giant sword that was bulky and had to be at least 50 pounds. And the woman held a hunting rifle with a bayonet attached to the end of it. The creature finished eating my arm and turned his head towards the pair, and a low noise started to come from it, almost as if it was laughing. The pair stopped a couple of yards away from the beast and whispered to one another and sent glances my way. I didn't have time to think anymore. I needed to sleep on my eyelids shut without resistance, and all I saw was darkness. I was weightless in an infinite void. At this point, it didn't matter if my eyes were closed or open, as the dark assailed me from both ways and was constant in the feeling of what I could feel as nothing. I wasn't sure how long I floated through this expanse, as it felt like decades, but I was sure it was only a second that had passed. I continued in this limbo for a while. I fell asleep a few times, which was weird, as I've come to the conclusion that I was dead. However, as I started to feel the boredom creep up on me like a fox on a rabbit, a man appeared in my vision. The man that appeared before me surprised me. It was the same guy from the woods who was jittery. The man turned to face me and let out a nervous chuckle and said, "You sure are hard to find. Like, what even is this place?" This caused me to pause. He said that he had to find me, which meant I was not dead. Cool. I replied, "When you say find me, what do you mean by that? Aren't I dead?" He shifted and said, "Well, that's hard to explain, and we don't have an abundance of it. So I'll just tell you what I meant to tell you, which is that you're in a dream. So I'm going to tell you how to get out of it," he said with a bit of urgency that further showed his readiness of him wanting to leave this place. "Okay then, just hurry up and tell me the way out," I said with a confused tone. This caused his face to go beet red. He said with a slightly annoyed tone, "You have to walk forward until you reach the end of this plane." While he was talking, I thought I heard the creak of his teeth as they neared being shattered due to his airtight clenched jaw. "So I just walk forward until I fall off? That easy?" I replied with a somewhat sceptical tone. He gave a curt nod of his head and then began to say, "Yes, it's that easy. You should know since..." As he was talking, he suddenly disappeared from the spot he was at. It was as if he was never there. He literally disappeared in the blink of an eye. As I stood for a moment longer, an alien feeling took over me as I contemplated what I had been doing this entire time. I never attempted to move forward, only stay where I was. That's when I resolved to go forward into the dark. The first step was the hardest, as it felt as I had forgotten how to walk. Then the third and fourth steps got easier. This continued until I was jogging to eventually running through the endless wave of darkness. This continued to the point where my lungs screamed in pain. My legs ached from the constant strain I was putting them through, and my throat was stark dry. Then, as if my feet were on a rug that had been suddenly snapped away, I was falling. I jumped out of the spot I was laying in, my bed soaked from sweat. I breathed in as I had just woke from the dead. It took about a minute to regain control of my breathing, as it was erratic and would only allow me to take shallow inhales of air. But as I regained control, I started to see the state of what was once my room. The reason I say once is for the fact that I must have been dragged off into a luxury penthouse, as the room had furniture that seemed to have a gold outline of some sort on most of it. The furniture had a sharp and modern look to it, and I could tell from a distance that it was made of top quality material, that I shuddered from the suspected price of it all. I looked at a black duffel bag on a mahogany table. It was a stark contrast to the rest of the room. I pushed myself off the bed and walked over to the duffel bag that sat on the table and began to inspect the bag. It was a plain duffel bag that you could buy anywhere, so I unzipped the bag to look at the contents, and what I saw surprised me. The first item was a uniform I was familiar with, which was my standard issued uniform as SWAT, which included a matching shirt and pants, along with a heavy Kevlar vest that had a pistol holster and knife holster. A bulletproof helmet and a black ski mask with a skull design were also among the clothes. Under all of that was a black tactical belt that had pouches for ammunition, along with a holster for a pistol and a place for a knife. Also under all of that sat a pair of matching Glock 18s, with two black tactical knives sitting alongside them. All of this baffled me, as I was sure that I didn't have guns or knives on me, as they were against flight regulations. So how I got them was confusing. And the uniform and gear were made of different material, as it was rougher and heavier than my last set. Then I looked towards the front door and saw a huge cart that sat from the left side of the door frame and went across until it reached a window that had its curtains drawn. I stopped at the middle of the crate and leaned over to pop the two locks that held it down, and when I opened the crate, all I could do was stare in dismay. The crate had an MP5 along with black combat boots that sat upon a mountain of magazines for the Glock and MP5. Enough ammo to supply a small army. That's when I came to the realization that something happened to me, and that's when I also remembered the events that transpired in the forest. All of this gave me a dull headache as I contemplated what could be plausible and reasonable explanation for what was going on, and why I had enough armament for me to take on an army. All I could come up with was wild theories and conspiracies of the possible, so I resolved myself to get some fresh air and headed for the door. I grasped the gold handle, twisted it, and pushed open the door. and was met with a hallway that leads to either a dead end or an elevator. So I made my way towards the elevator and pressed the button to what I assumed was the ground floor. Stereotypical elevator music assaulted my ears as I made my way down the 7 floors, until I felt the elevator land at its destination. I walked through the lobby, ignoring the tired receptionist, and walked into the sliding glass doors. I walked through the doors, and what I saw and felt caused me to choke in surprise. And I hope you enjoy the blooper reel. How can you handle a situation that you once thought hope shone through only? I always thought that the idea of instinct and survival were fascinating and could be considered part of my job that kept me alive, with me being a police officer who can I still firmly believe that there are still... Well, I have to attempt to start it, as it didn't want to. There was no time for belly aching, as I opened the door slowly to make sure there wasn't a soul around, and quickly, under the guise of night, darted to the forest. I could even smell the newly bloomed roses of I could even smell the newly bloomed I pushed the rock into its mouth, but it just bit through the rock, taking my pinky ring finger and half my... I also noticed the weapons that they were carrying. The man was holding a giant sword that was as... Then I looked towards the front door and saw a huge cart that sat from the left side of the door frame and went across until it reached a window that had no... Hey family, please be so kind as to punch the like button and smack the ass of the subscription button as well. And remember to chokehold that notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. And by subscribing, you'll be the first to see all of our new spooky creepypasta stories. A very big thank you to Officer Gallows for allowing me to narrate this awesome series. And why not hashtag Cryptids Roost in your comments. A quick thank you to all my Cryptids Roost community family too. We are now well on our journey to 1,000 subscribers. If you would like to support us and throw me $1 or $3, I'd be very much appreciative. I do have PayPal, paypal.me/cryptidsroost. Alternatively, I have an account at buymeacoffee.com. You don't even need to register on either site to donate. I have a subreddit if you have a story you've written that you would like me to narrate for you. You can also follow us. All my socials are contained within the Linktree link below. And don't forget to check out the end screen. See above. That will also list some more videos in my back catalogue. All the links are below. Take care everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful night. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is.